It all started with a simple, regrettable mistake, a misplaced halogen beam on a dark African night.
Easy there,
Young
Kito.
Ranger Ethan
You're safe
inadvertently
now.
stole the mother from Kito,
I'm here to
a
help.
fragile lion cub. That consuming guilt forced him into the role of a surrogate parent, yet the very act of domestication became another crime. Kito rejected human aid, but found absolute solace from an utterly unexpected source, Goliath, the massive Great Dane. This peculiar relationship healed all three, but it also set an emotional trap. This is not just a rescue story. It's a painful truth. Love across species can certainly build a family, but the wild instinct always demands the ultimate freedom. This unusual family must learn the hardest lesson of all: how to let go before affection becomes a cage. The beam of the halogen lamp cut through the dense African night like a startled ghost. Ethan, a 20-something ranger fresh out of a Montana wildlife program, cursed under his breath. He was supposed to be mapping the territory of a new lion pride, a critical task for the park's conservation efforts. But in his rush to secure the perimeter near the southern boundary, he'd fumbled with the light control, bathing the undergrowth in a harsh, sudden glare. It was enough. The sudden brightness was a siren in the darkness. He heard the panicked roar of the lioness, the matriarch, followed by the heavy, thundering retreat of the entire pride. Ethan killed the light instantly, the sudden silence deepening his shame. This wasn't just a minor mistake, it was a violation of trust, and in this environment, violations had consequences. The consequence arrived the next morning, not with a roar, but a whimper. Tucked clumsily beneath a fallen acacia, still too weak to move much, was a tiny lion cub. It was scrawny, trembling, and utterly alone. Ethan knew, with a certainty that settled like lead in his stomach, that this cub's abandonment was his fault. He had startled the mother so badly she hadn't had the time or the nerve to retrieve her smallest. Ethan carried the cub back to his isolated outpost, a small prefab cabin nestled miles from the main compound. He named him Kito, Swahili for precious gem, though the cub looked anything but precious, fighting off the cold and the fear with weak, frantic movements. Ethan spent the first 48 hours in a fog of worry and sleeplessness. He tried every substitute milk formula, every warming trick. Kito would feed briefly, but the moment the physical contact ceased, the shivering and the desperate high-pitched cries would return. The cub needed warmth, yes, but more specifically, it needed weight. It needed the heavy, comforting presence of its mother's body. Ethan's own companion, Goliath, was an 8-year-old Great Dane. He was a giant of a dog, all muscle, floppy ears, and gentle, soulful eyes. Goliath had watched the tiny new arrival with a calm curiosity that Ethan found deeply soothing. But having Goliath near didn't help Kito's anxiety. The dog was too reserved, too formal. On the third night, after Kito had cried itself hoarse and Ethan was staring blankly at the ceiling, fighting the urge to quit the service altogether, he did something desperate. He didn't ask Goliath. He simply picked up the tiny, exhausted lion cub and nestled him deep into Goliath's thick chest fur. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Kito stopped crying mid-whimper. He burrowed his nose into the dog's warmth, his tiny claws kneading automatically against the Dane's skin. Goliath, for his part, remained perfectly still, a massive, unmoving pillow of comfort. Then, slowly, carefully, the Great Dane lowered his great head and offered a single, soft, maternal lick to the cub's head. Kito, secure at last, began to emit a tiny, peaceful rumble, a lion's purr. In that unexpected moment, Ethan realized that he, the ranger, could provide the food, but Goliath, the gentle giant, was the only one who could provide the cure. The fragile miracle didn't last long before reality intruded. 2 weeks into Kito's life at the outpost, Ethan received a terse, scheduled satellite call from Mr. Robert, the park director, a seasoned veteran known for his unwavering adherence to protocol. "Ethan," Robert's voice crackled over the line, devoid of warmth. "I received your initial report. The cub is alive. That's good, but this is not a pet project. You have 30 days, Ranger. If Kito shows no ability to begin weaning and developing proper solitary survival instincts by then, we move it to the holding center for permanent facility life. We cannot have a half-domesticated lion running around our boundary. Do you understand?" Ethan looked at the Great Dane and the sleeping lion cub curled between his massive paws. "Understood, sir," he whispered, though he knew Kito had already found his permanent facility, and it had 4 legs and a huge, kind heart. The 30-day clock had begun. The ticking of Robert's 30-day clock was not audible, yet it dictated every second of Ethan's life. The fear of having Kito institutionalized spurred the young ranger into a focused routine, but the true labor was being performed, without fanfare, by Goliath. The small outpost transformed. It became a theater of improbable domesticity. Gone were the cub's frantic cries. They were replaced by the contented rumble of a lion cub that was rapidly gaining weight and strength. Kito's growth was astronomical. Within 2 weeks, the little scrap of fur that fit snugly under Ethan's arm had become a sturdy, if still clumsy, teenager of a cub. Their life settled into a rhythm of utter contradiction. In the mornings, Kito would demand his bottle from Ethan, but his post-meal ritual was strictly with Goliath. This was the healing montage that defined the period. Kito chewing playfully on Goliath's enormous dewlap. Goliath allowing the cub to use his muscular back as a warm, living mattress for naps. The quiet patience as Kito explored the world through mock pounces and clumsy attempts at hunting. Goliath was more than a surrogate mother. He was an unconventional teacher. When Kito would bite too hard or claw too aggressively during a game, Goliath wouldn't recoil or growl in fear. Instead, he would emit a low, rumbling huff, a sound closer to a warning than a whine, and pin the cub gently but firmly with a massive paw. It was the swift physical discipline Kito needed, the kind of boundary setting the mother lion would have enforced. Ethan, who filmed every interaction for his reports, realized he wasn't watching a dog tolerate a lion. He was watching a teacher impart the rules of physical power. Ethan felt the healing in his own spirit. The guilt that had been a suffocating blanket since the night of his mistake began to lift. He cleaned his cabin, he ate better, and he found himself laughing aloud, a sound that had been absent from his solitary life for months. Kito gave him purpose, and Goliath gave Kito life. It was a perfect, self-contained ecosystem of recovery. But such perfection was, in the unforgiving realm of conservation, inherently fragile. Mr. Robert arrived unannounced on the 25th day, 5 days before the deadline. His presence was immediately chilling, bringing the rigid discipline of the main camp to Ethan's secluded, warm world. Robert strode into the compound, his gaze sharp and critical, bypassing Ethan to focus entirely on the 2 animals playing in the secure outdoor pen Ethan had constructed. Kito, spotting the new presence, didn't respond with a lion's innate suspicion. Instead, he bounded to the wire mesh, wagging his small, thick tail with the enthusiasm of a puppy, then immediately retreated to rub his head against Goliath's side for reassurance. Robert's mouth tightened. "Look at him, Ethan. Does that look like a lion developing solitary instincts? He's scent-marking his mother. He's displaying social behaviors appropriate for a pack animal, which he is, but he's imprinted on a domestic dog." Robert gestured sharply at Kito. "The dog gives him comfort, yes, but it is teaching him to be dependent on a creature that is fundamentally submissive to humans. This is an ethical and biological disaster waiting to happen. Ethan stepped forward, a rare heat in his voice. Sir, he would have died without Goliath. He's thriving. He's learning physical boundaries, which he wouldn't get from a human. He's massive, strong, and he doesn't fear me, but he respects Goliath. Respect is not the same as instinct, Robert countered, unyielding. The clock is almost out, Ranger, and I see a lion that thinks it's a Great Dane. He left as abruptly as he came, leaving behind a silence heavier than any reprimand. The tension of Robert's visit lingered, but it was nothing compared to the shock that came 2 days later. Kito, now, weighing nearly 50 pounds, was wrestling with Goliath, a favorite rough-and-tumble activity. Kito, full of adolescent energy, feigned a bite to Goliath's throat, but this time, fueled by instinct that was beginning to override mimicry, the grip tightened just a fraction too much. Goliath, for the first time since Kito arrived, let out a deep, resonant, serious growl that vibrated through the ground. It was not a warning bark. It was the ancient sound of a powerful animal defending itself. Startled, Kito released his grip, but the damage was done. Kito's claw had caught Goliath's flank, tearing a shallow, crimson gash in the dense hide. Ethan rushed over, pulling Kito away. He was terrified, not just for his dog, but by the stark, undeniable truth revealed in that moment. The wild was surfacing, raw and uncontrolled. The cub's healing journey had reached an irreversible stage. Kito wasn't just playing, he was practicing, and the gentle giant, the surrogate mother, had been momentarily recognized as prey. Ethan knelt, treating Goliath's wound, his hands shaking. He looked from the massive, stoic dog to the young, confused lion. He had sought to save Kito from death, but in doing so, he had invited the untamed, lethal nature of Africa into his own home. The fragile miracle of their union was reaching its violent breaking point, and the realization hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow. He was running out of time to choose between Kito's survival and Kito's freedom. The shallow wound on Goliath's flank was more than a scratch. It was a psychological chasm opening between the two animals. Ethan immediately increased the size and security of Kito's enclosure, desperate to prevent a repeat incident. The cub, now entering its 6-month growth spurt, was a magnificent, albeit confused, beast of 75 pounds. Its playful pounces had become deliberate, and the low, contented purr was often replaced by a guttural rumbling when strangers, or even Ethan himself, approached too quickly during feeding. The dynamic shifted drastically. Kito's innate hunting instincts, dormant for months beneath Goliath's physical comfort, began to assert themselves. He started stalking the small monitor lizards and birds that ventured too close to the enclosure. And then came the most troubling development. Kito began to vocalize like a true lion. His playful roars were now louder, carrying across the miles of savanna, an open, dangerous invitation. The isolation of Ethan's outpost, once a sanctuary, was becoming a liability. The final straw came during a severe thunderstorm. The lashing rain and cracking thunder triggered an ancestral terror in Kito. He paced violently, his massive paws digging into the earth. Ethan, trying to soothe him, was met with a low, menacing snarl. This was no longer the whimpering cub of Act 1. This was a predatory creature overwhelmed by primal fear. In the midst of the storm's fury, Kito found the weak spot in the reinforced wire, a section damaged by a recent falling branch. With a focused, powerful charge, he tore through the barrier and was gone, vanishing into the storm-drenched night. Ethan's heart plunged. This was the midpoint climax, the crisis he had desperately tried to avert. He grabbed his tracker and radio, realizing he couldn't call Mr. Robert yet. To report Kito's escape meant initiating a full-scale capture, likely involving tranquilizer darts and potentially lethal force if the lion reacted aggressively near a human settlement. The search began, a desperate race against the elements and the clock. Ethan, accompanied by a grim, rain-soaked Goliath, followed Kito's distinct tracks, pushing deep into the restricted reserve areas. Ethan was no longer a caretaker. He was a hunter tracking his own flawed creation. By dawn, Robert had been alerted by the noise of Kito's violent escape. His voice, when it crackled over Ethan's radio, was ice cold. "Ranger, I have mobilized a full capture team. Kito is considered a threat. You failed the 30-day assessment. If you find him, do not engage. Mark his location and wait for the professionals." Robert and his team, a helicopter, 3 trucks, and armed personnel, became the antagonist force of the chapter, representing the unyielding authority of law and the harsh reality of conservation science. They were not malicious, but their goal, Kito's swift containment or elimination, was fundamentally opposed to Ethan's desperate need for Kito's freedom. Ethan ignored the order. He and Goliath, moving silently, continued their unauthorized hunt, driven by a bond Robert couldn't understand. The search culminated in a clearing near a waterhole, not far from the park's eastern boundary, where a small herd of wildebeest grazed nervously. Ethan found Kito not by sight, but by sound, a low, rhythmic scraping of claws on rock, followed by a profound, chilling silence. Kito was crouched low on a rocky outcrop, perfectly still, his eyes locked onto a young, vulnerable wildebeest. He was practicing the final, deadly sequence of the hunt. As Ethan stepped into the clearing, Kito turned his head. But this was the final, devastating transformation. The lion cub that had rubbed against Goliath and purred in Ethan's lap was gone. Standing before him was a predator, magnificent and terrifying. Kito raised his lip, exposing teeth capable of snapping bone, and let loose a deep, challenging snarl, not of confusion or fear, but of territorial defense. It was the ultimate betrayal of domestication. In that moment, Kito didn't recognize Ethan or Goliath as family. He saw them as competitors, a threat to his kill and his newfound identity. The world dissolved for Ethan. The guilt, the love, the sleepless nights, all culminated in this devastating recognition. He had given Kito life, only to rob him of his purpose. Just as the helicopter blades began to whirl in, the distance indicating Robert's team was closing in, Kito turned his back on Ethan and, with a powerful, graceful thrust, launched himself at the startled wildebeest. Ethan watched, frozen, as the young lion executed a flawless, instinctive chase. He knew that any shot, whether tranquilizers or lethal, would be difficult now. Kito was wild, Kito was free, and Kito was about to kill. The sound of the helicopter grew deafening, drowning out the impending clash of hunter and hunted. Ethan finally pulled the radio to his lips, his voice raw with defeat. "Robert, I have eyes on Kito. He's engaged. He's fully operational. He's a wild animal now." The game was over. Kito had chosen the wild, and Ethan was left standing in the ruins of his misplaced love. The chase team was minutes away from making the final painful decision. The moment Kito launched himself at the wildebeest, the scene erupted into chaos. Robert's helicopter was directly overhead, rotor wash whipping dust and dry grass into a frenzy. Yet the chaos was Kito's element. He was faster, sharper, and utterly focused. He wasn't the clumsy cub Ethan had rescued. He was a lion in his prime, making his first successful kill. The capture team moved in fast, but they were too late for the wildebeest, and now they were facing a fully successful, adrenalized predator. Robert, watching from the helicopter, made the call. "Tranquilizer only, boys. He's too wild, but he proved Ethan's point. He earned his release." It took 3 darts and a desperate, harrowing hour to subdue Kito. Ethan, standing guard with Goliath, watched the animal he had raised collapse into chemically induced sleep. The sight was devastating. The next day was the day of departure. Kito, crated and strapped into a specialized transport truck, was being moved to a remote, expansive reserve hundreds of miles away, where a smaller, established pride was ready to accept a young male. Robert, weary but resolute, stood before Ethan at the outpost. "You disobeyed direct orders, Ranger. You could have been seriously hurt, or worse, compromised the safety of the entire area. But you also bought Kito the time to fully embrace his instincts. You gave him a life, and he chose the wild. That's the best outcome." Robert paused, his face softening slightly. "You won't be accompanying the transfer team, Ethan. It's time for Kito to leave your scent and your influence behind." Ethan nodded, a heavy sense of finality settling on him. He stepped back, resigned to watch the truck drive away. But as the truck's engine rumbled, Robert made his unexpected move, the emotional twist of the finale. "Load the dog, too," Robert instructed the driver, catching Ethan's shocked gaze. "Kito needs a transition. He needs a familiar scent to bridge the fear of the unknown. Ethan, you can't go, but Goliath can give him the courage to step through that final gate." Ethan rushed Goliath to the truck. The gentle giant seemed to understand the solemnity of his final, shared duty. Hours later, deep within the new reserve, Goliath walked alongside Kito's massive cage as the young lions slowly awoke from the tranquilizer. When they reached the final open gate to the vast, undeveloped bush, Kito's crate was opened. The lion hesitated. He sniffed the unfamiliar air, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. He looked back, past Ethan, who stood 50 yards away, watching, and focused entirely on Goliath, his large, calm anchor. Goliath stepped forward, placed his massive head against the metal frame of the cage, and delivered a long, final, deep, maternal lick across Kito's powerful muzzle. It was Goliath's ultimate act of love and farewell, a silent assurance that it was safe to go. Kito drew a deep breath, looked at Goliath one last time, and then, with a single magnificent bound, he surged out of the crate and vanished into the high grass. He ran not as a pet, but as a king reclaiming his inheritance. 1 year later, Ethan, no longer working solo at the outpost, accepted a promotion working on reintroduction projects within the larger park. He and Goliath often drove near Kito's known territory. On one such quiet evening, through powerful binoculars, Ethan spotted them. Kito, sleek and huge, walking confidently with his new pride. He was free. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.